Hi, this is Leah with Handwoven by Leah, and today I'm continuing on with the beginner quilting series. What we're going to do today is learn how to sew a block together. So we're going to start from the very beginning. This is the block that we're going to make, and then after that I'm going to show you how to make flying geese, which looks like that. Alright, so the first thing that you want to do is iron your fabric. So I've already done that. And then in your instructions it says you need 3 fabrics. So a light color, a dark color, and a white would be good. You can use scraps. The supplies that you need are a sewing machine. 1/4 inch sewing foot is helpful. Cotton thread, sewing pins, rotary cutter, acrylic ruler, rotary cutting mat, iron and ironing board. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is cut out our fabrics. On the dark teal, I'm going to use this color for my dark teal. It says you need 3 4x4 inch squares. So what we're going to do is, first things first, we need to get a nice straight line on our fabric. So I'm going to line one of the lines of the ruler up, my big ruler, with the fold in the fabric down here. And then I'm going to cut. So now I have a straight edge to cut against, or to measure against. So I need 3 4x4 squares. So what I'm going to do is, instead of like just cutting out 3 squares, opening up the fabric and cutting out 3 squares, what I'm going to do is cut 4 inches times width of fabric. Otherwise your fabric just gets messy when you start piecing and cutting here and there, and it's just not nice. Okay, so I put my ruler 4 inches on the line here, and then I butted up the larger ruler to this, and I measured up here and down here so that I know I'm going in a straight line. And don't forget, when you start cutting, move your hand up here before you continue on so that your ruler doesn't slide. Alright, and once in a while it doesn't completely cut. I need a new blade in my cutter, I think. Alright, so I'm going to cut off the selvage. Because we don't want or need that. And then I need 3 4x4 squares. So I'm going to leave it folded. And I'm going to put this on the 4-inch mark. Butt this up against the ruler. And cut. So there's 2 pieces. Now I'm going to unfold it because I only need 1 more piece. I'm going to unfold this, put this on my 4-inch mark, butt my ruler up against it, and cut. So now I have 3 of those. And then I can use this fabric, just keep it in your scrap pile, and you can use this later for something else. Alright, the next thing I'm going to cut is the lighter piece of fabric. And this is just a small scrap piece that I had, but I still need to get my straight edge. So I know line up with the fold of the fabric at the bottom. Cut that off. Now I have my straight edge. This says I need 3 pieces 4 by 4 inches. So we're going to do the same thing again. Put it on your 4-inch mark. Measure top and bottom. And then cut. Get rid of your selvage. Leave it folded together because we need 3, so this will make 2 pieces, the first cut. And then we'll unfold the fabric for the 3rd cut since we only need 1 more piece. I don't want to cut it double. All right, there's my 3 lighter colored pieces. And again, just keep this in your scrap pile. You can use it for something. And then I need 6 4 by 4 white pieces. And remember, I ironed all these before. I mean, it looked wrinkly over here, but I only ironed the amount that I knew I was going to need because it's just going to get folded up and wrinkled again. Get your straight edge. Line that up at the bottom. And I cut off as little as I need, so I'm not wasting a bunch of fabric. So just scoot your ruler over until it looks right. Cut that off. And then again, I'm going to do 4 inches. Butt the ruler up. 4 inches down here. Butt the ruler up. And then cut. Again, stopping and moving your hand as you cut. Oops, didn't cut through. I really need a new blade on here. I just snagged that. Okay. Cut your selvage off. Should have changed my blade before I started this project, but I'll change it before I do the next one. Okay, we need 3 pieces, 4 by 4. There's 2. Open it up. Cut 1 more, 4 inches. And then I need 4 3.5 inch white pieces. So this piece that I cut was 4 inches, but we're going to use it. I'll just have to cut it smaller. Okay, so 3.5 inches. Line your edges back up so that you can cut 2 at a time. And this time we need, oh shoot, we needed 6 of these. 1, 2, 3. I gotta cut some more. 4 by 4 white, we needed 6 of them. All right, let's do that real quick. Always double check your pattern. There's 2 more, I need 1 more. Double check your cutting, double check what your pattern says, make sure you're cutting the right measurements. All right, so there's 6 of those now. All right, back to the last cut. 4 pieces, 3.5 by 3.5. So I'm going to line this up, folding it in half again. All right, so 3.5. Butt this up. Now, since this is 4 inches wide, I need to cut it down to 3.5. So I'm just going to turn it, line up my 3.5 mark. And cut that off. So there's 2. And I need 2 more. So 3.5. Lined up with the edge of the fabric. Turn it, measure 3.5 because it was 4 inches, remember? So we got to make it a 3.5 by 3.5. So there's 4 pieces. All right, so that used up your scrap. You didn't have to cut another piece. So always use your extra pieces if you can when it calls for a smaller size. And that's one thing that I do when I look at the pattern as well. Say that it said I needed 6 4x4 white and I needed 4 5x5 white. I would have cut it at 5 inches times width of fabric. That would have been my initial cut, because then I would know that I could cut it down to the 4x4. But if I started out and I just cut the 4x4 in the white, and then the next thing says cut 5x5, I've wasted fabric by having to cut 4 inches by width of fabric, and then I was going to have leftover fabric, and then I have to go and cut another 5 inches times width of fabric. So I always try to plan ahead and look at what measurements you need cut. All right, so there are our pieces. The next thing we're going to do is make the half square triangles 2 at a time. So following the diagram, there's what it looks like. It says to place a light and dark fabric square right sides together. So I'm going to take my dark and my light, and I'm going to put them right sides together. Now I use Kona fabric, so it doesn't have a right and wrong side, so I can just put them together easily. Now I want to draw a diagonal line from one corner to the opposite corner. So use my smaller ruler. Get that lined up corner to corner. And I use the heat erase pens. So I've made my diagonal line. On both sides of the diagonal line, stitch a scant 1/4 inch seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that. I actually have a foot that's a scant 1/4 of an inch, but most people won't because most machines don't make that accessory. So I'm just going to mark it. You want just a hair or two less than the than 1/4 of an inch. So I'll mark that line, and then I'm going to turn this around and mark the other line. So I'm just guessing with my ruler. I'm just moving it over like a hair past that line and then making my mark. Okay, so if you don't have to make the lines, but I just think it's easier to follow a line because you can't follow the guides on your sewing machine because you're going in like this. And so this is going to be in the way of your lines on the sewing machine. You can't put a piece of tape down and do it because, again, this is going to be in the way. So I find marking the lines is the easiest way to go. All right, so let's see. Using a quilter's ruler and rotary cutter, cut along the pencil line, press seams to one side, and trim the block. Okay, so we have to go and sew this. And it's not telling me how many I need to make. So that's not good for this pattern. It's not telling me how many half square triangles to make. So I'm going to have to look at the picture. So we need 1, 2, 3. So we need 6. We have, okay, I've sewn my pieces together. And what we're going to do next is cut on the center line. So you're going to cut them apart on that center line. So now I have 2 triangles. And we're going to cut them all apart. Alright, so now I have 6, which is what I need. These are going to be squares when I open them up. So the directions now say, press seams to one side, trim the block down to 3.5 inches using a square quilting ruler. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I have the clearly perfect slotted trimmers. And it looks like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these, and these need to be 3.5 inch squares. So there's a dotted line at 3.5 inches. I'm going to put my sewing line, I'm going to put the dotted line on the sewing line. And then there's a line that goes down the middle vertically. And you're going to line that up with the point at the top. And then we're going to trim this off, and then it's going to be the perfect size. But in order to do that easily, I need my rotary, my Lazy Susan, I like to call it. So I don't have to pick it up. I can just turn it and not lose where I'm at. All right, so line this up. We're going to cut one side off, turn, cut the other side off, and then in the last slot, you're going to cut your corners off. So when I open this up, it looks like this. It's a perfect 3.5 inch square. So all I need to do is iron it, and I don't need to square it again because I've just squared it up. So I just need to press the seam. And you're going to do the same thing with the rest of these. So I'm going to do that, and then I will come back and continue from there. 3, so that's 2. So all of these we need to do mark all of these. So take a light and a dark, put them together. Draw your diagonal line. Go over a scant 1/4 of an inch. Draw another line. So these outside lines that you're drawing are what you're going to sew on. You're not going to sew on the middle line. Turn it around. Do another scant 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go sew on these lines, and then I'll come back and continue. Alright, one thing I want to go over, if you don't have that trimmer that I was using, that ruler, you need to know how to square up a square. So I have this 4 by 4 inch square, and I need to square it up to 3.5 by 3.5. And a lot of times after you've sewn, it's not going to be perfectly square anymore because fabric stretches. So we want to square that up. So what you need is a ruler, something like this. This can square up to 11.5 inches, I believe. But what you want to do is, see this center, if you can see it on here, there's this line here, a line here, and a line here. You want to take this center line, and the 3 mark, because of this extra here, this colored bit here, that's a 1/2 inch. So we're going to use the 3 by 3 mark, because that's actually 3.5 by 3.5 because of this extra edge that you have there. So you want to put that line it up in the corner, right? And then you're going to cut off that bottom and side. And then we're going to turn it twice. 1, 2. Say we've already cut it. Now we're going to line that up perfectly and cut it off. So let me just show you over here. Hopefully you can see. Alright, so I'm taking that center diagonal line and I'm putting it corner to corner, but I need to cut off some of the fabric. So you just line it up how you need to line it up. Alright, that looks about good. So I'm going to cut that off, and I'm going to rotate this and cut that off. Alright, so now we're going to turn this so that the cut edges are on this side, these sides, and I'm going to line that up with the 3. I'm going to put the diagonal in the corner and put those edges that I just cut on the 3-inch mark. And then I'm going to cut the side off. And the bottom. So now I have a perfectly square 3.5 by 3.5 inch square. So that's how, if you don't have that trimmer that I used, you would iron these open to begin with. After you sew them, iron them open, and then use this ruler to line up and cut it to be 3.5 by 3.5 inches. Okay, so that's how you do it without those rulers. Those rulers just make it so much more simple. Just remember not to iron it open first. You cut it and then you iron it open. Alright, so we're going to go to the sewing machine next, so I will be back with you in just a second. Okay, the next thing it says to do is arrange your blocks and HSTs in correct layout pictured below. So this is our layout. So we want to lay it out on the table like that. So you're going to take oh shoot, Leah, all right, I've done this wrong. See, wasn't paying attention because I was trying to teach. I sewed the light and the dark together. What I should have been doing is sewing the dark to white and the light to white. So I'm going to have to fix that. I'm going to have to redo these blocks. Let me do that and then I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. I've fixed my blocks, so now I have the dark blue with white, the light blue with white. So now we need to follow this to make the block, to lay the block out. So the first thing we're going to do is the smaller squares that we cut. You need one of those. And then you need the darker colored block and the white, and you need to follow the pattern to make sure you're putting it the right direction. I don't know if you can see there. And then we need a light one that's going to go this direction, and then we need a white one. And then we need a dark and white HST, another dark and white HST, a light HST, another light HST, a light HST, goes that way, a light HST, a dark HST, another dark one, a white square, light HST, dark HST, and another white square. Alright, so if you can see that, that's what it looks like now. So what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing this together. So we're going to take this first row and sew them together. So you're going to sew it together here, here, and here. And then we'll sew the next row together, and the next row, and the next row. So let me do that, and then I'll be back. Okay, I've sewn these together, and one thing that you need to do when you start sewing rows together, like this first row, this seam allowance, I pressed to the right on every single square. I pressed it all to the right. The next row, you want to press it to the left, your seam allowances. That's called nesting your seams. If you press your seams to the right on every single row, you're going to have thick areas that is going to be hard to quilt over. But if you alternate them left, right, then they nest easily together, and it just is thinner and easier to quilt later. So now what we want to do is to sew these 4 rows together. But what you want to do is you need to match up your seams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this first one. I think you can still see. And then, so here's my first 2 rows, right? I'm going to flip this on top of that row there, the first row. So I'm going to flip the second row on top of the first row. And then I turn it around so I can see better this way. And I line up my seams. Now, if your blocks are square, they should line up. If they're not square, they won't line up. And then you'll have to start messing around with the seam allowance until they line up the way they're supposed to. And then what I do is I put a pin in each seam. If you put it in the seam, it just holds those seams together better so that they don't move on you when you're sewing the 2 rows together. So I pin that. And pin this one. Alright, and now I'm going to sew these 2 rows together. Okay, then I'm going to take the pins out, and I'm going to go and press this open before I sew anything else on. So I'm going to press that, then I'm going to sew the next row on and the next row. Once I've done that, then I will come back to you. Okay, so I finished my block, and now the last thing I need to do is to square it up. So we want to square this to be 12.5 inches. And unfortunately, my Lazy Susan is not big enough to do that. So I need to get my rulers sorted out here. Alright, so this square is 12.5 by 12.5. So what I want to do is, again, this is the one that has these 3 lines going like that. I want to use this middle one, put it in this corner, and line that up to this other corner. And I don't have a lot of wiggle room with this because the block is pretty near 12.5. I always like to have a little extra room, you know, to cut, but I don't have much that I can cut with this one. So I've lined that up. I'm going to cut this left side off. And then if I had my rotating mat, I could spin it, but it's not big enough. So then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to cut the top off. Right, and then, see, I still need to change the blade on this cutter. Alright, so then I need to turn it twice. 1, 2. So the edges that I just cut are on my right and at the bottom. I'm going to perfectly line up the right and the bottom, and then cut the left and the top with whatever's left over. Okay. So there's my "12.5" squared up block. Now sometimes what happens, and this one's close, is that just because how fabric changes when you sew it, can warp it, can pull it, different things like that. There's an area up here that is a little short of 12.5. If you ever have that happen, what you can do is cut out a piece of paper, freezer paper. Freezer paper is shiny on the back and dull on the front. So like if you had a pencil, you could write on the front, the dull side, but you wouldn't be able to write on the shiny side. What you would do is cut that to be 12.5 by 12.5. You would lay this on top of it. And so any area that is short, you'll see the freezer paper. So when you lay it on top, you lay the freezer paper down, dull side goes down, shiny side is up. Lay this on top of it, line it up right, and then go to your iron and iron it. Putting heat on freezer paper, if you have a shiny side facing the back of your fabric, it's going to stick to it. You would leave that on there, and it pulls away easily. So you're going to leave that on there until you sew that block onto another block. That gives you the extra seam allowance that you need. So you'll sew it onto the next block, and then once you've done that, I would leave the paper on there, because like this one, I'm short at the top. So I need that freezer paper for when I'm sewing this top seam. Once I get that top seam sewn to another block, then I can just pull the freezer paper off. Now you're going to be sewing through the freezer paper, so it's going to be a little bit difficult because you're going to be pulling it through the stitches, but it'll come off. Not too difficult. And then your block will be aligned with the other blocks as it should be. I think that's it for today. The next video I will show you how to make the flying geese that I talked about earlier today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.